We have a pretty interesting Vancouver Canucks trade rumor to discuss tonight. Could they actually consider trading Brock Boeser? We'll discuss the latest rumor coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we heard of a major NHL trade rumor focusing on the Vancouver Canucks earlier this evening from TSN Radio. Matt Sekeres on TSN Radio has said that he has word that the Canucks have been exploring a Brock Boeser trade. Now, you can't help but wonder, why would they do that? Brock Boeser is one of the top young players in the league. He has a pretty reasonable contract, but as we know, there's going to be a flat salary cap for at least one, maybe 2 to 3 seasons. That's going to be a major problem for many NHL teams, especially the Canucks. They've been, obviously not in great cap shape. They have some big-time contracts coming up for younger players like Quinn Hughes and Elias Pettersson. And obviously they want to try to re-sign their goalie, Jacob Markstrom. There's a lot going on in Vancouver, and the salary cap is going to be a major problem for them moving forward. Now, of course, Brock Boeser, though, is not a player that we expected to be mentioned in NHL trade rumors. Now, of course, let's take a look now at the Vancouver Canuck salary cap situation, especially within their forward group. I want to take a look at some of the other contracts that are certainly not looked upon as favorable, somewhat problematic, causing a lot of these issues, and why could they possibly consider trading Brock Boeser. So let's dig in here and explore a little bit further. Now, if you look at their salary cap situation, you're going to see a lot of contracts there that are not really all that favorable, as I mentioned, that they would rather move on from. You got Louis Eriksson, who's making $6 million for 2 more years. That's a big-time problematic contract. You got Jay Beagle, who was signed to a $3 million deal. He's got 2 more years left. You've got Antoine Roussel. I mean, he does have some value, but still $3 million for 2 more years. You got Brandon Sutter for 1 more year at $4.375. You got Michael Furlan at $3.5 for 3 more years. And obviously, he's got his health issues as well. Hard to say, but Jim Benning and the Canucks have spent a ton of money on bottom 6 forwards in recent years during free agency. We've seen other ones like a Tim Schaller. That contract was able to be moved out earlier this past season, but still, it's a lot of head-scratching moves that we've seen. As much as the Canucks have done a really good job with their rebuild, and they've certainly made some interesting trades, like that JT Miller trade. I know a lot of people questioned it in the beginning, but that's worked out really well for the Canucks. Miller had a phenomenal year and has really turned into being a top player, a great leader on that team. But due to this NHL pause, the lost revenue, and having a flat cap for many years, a lot of these bottom 6 big-time signings is really going to be coming back to haunt this team. And obviously, would you rather move out those players than a Brock Boeser? Absolutely. The only problem is that many of these players have next to no value, and you're going to have a very limited amount of teams that are going to have the cap space to really entertain that anyway. You're looking at the teams near the bottom of the league that won't be in the playoffs, like Ottawa, New Jersey, Detroit to an extent, but they're going to prefer to have these roster spots on their teams taken up by a lot of their top young players that are pushing to make that team better. Obviously, there's just not a lot of value. I mean, obviously, you're not going to say it's impossible, but to trade some of these players, they're going to want something else in return as a sweetener, and that very well would make a lot of sense as why they'd be exploring the possibility of a Brock Boeser contract. I mean, nobody's saying Brock Boeser is not a good player, that the Canucks don't like him as a player. That's clearly not the case here. I think they value him quite a bit. I think they like the contract that they get signed for him for the next little while. If he stays healthy and is very productive and continues to grow, could be problematic depending on where the cap situation is at that point in time, but that's not a problem for today. That's a problem for tomorrow, so I can't imagine they'd be exploring the possibility now. I mean, if you look around their team, they have a lot of other great young dynamic forwards in the roster. They have some really solid defensemen like a Quinn Hughes, who's going to be their stud defenseman for many years to come. They need to sign goaltender Jacob Markstrom. They'd like to retain Tyler Toffoli, but is any of that really worth giving up Boeser for? Now, keeping your goalie in Markstrom, sure, but he's an important part of the team, recently named team MVP. Obviously, you've got some other question marks on the blue line. There's Chris Tanev, Troy Stetchers at RFA. Who stays and who goes back there? It's difficult to say, but if you would hope that if you're going to trade a guy like Brock Boeser, that you're getting back like maybe a stud defenseman in return, somebody who could be the partner for Quinn Hughes for a long time. I mean, I know Chris Tanev is really hoping to re-sign with Vancouver and play that role for the next number of years, but it's difficult to say if that's going to work out. But with a guy like Boeser who would have substantial value, you're hard to say what your return could be. But obviously, if he's added as a sweetener to take a bad contract, then your return is going to be severely diminished for sure. So clearly, to move a guy like Louis Eriksson, as I mentioned before, it's not impossible, but you're going to have to add something into it to entice teams to take that contract on. I just never thought the Canucks would really go down the road of considering a guy like Boeser to be that piece of the puzzle. I always thought maybe it'd be more like a first-round draft pick or maybe a really solid young prospect that's coming up in the organization, because they have a number of good-looking prospects. But it's quite a head shaker here. Now, of course, there's no guarantee that Boeser gets moved, and the fact that teams are thinking about this or that doesn't really mean anything sometimes. Of course, if you're a general manager of a hockey team, you really need to be really looking at all angles all the time. Always the possibility of making your team better. There is possible to trade a big-time player and still improve, although a lot of those deals can be very tough to win sometimes, but they do work out on occasion. So clearly, I understand the fact that they'd be exploring some options, and it doesn't mean it's going to happen. But can you imagine Brock Boeser being traded as a sweetener to really move off some of these other bad contracts? And that would be like the teams losing him to pay for all their past free agent mistakes over the past number of years. Like, overall, I'll give Jim Benning a fairly decent grade as a GM. I think they've drafted really well. I think they've developed really well. I think he's made some good trades. But obviously, the free agent signings, the veteran guys that they've brought in, it's not even so much the players themselves. It's the contracts they gave them. They really overpaid. I know they couldn't have predicted the pandemic and the NHL shutdown and pause and a flat cap for a number of years. That's certainly wasn't in the future, but obviously it did happen, and it's now a problem for the Canucks and many other teams around the NHL. So I know I've seen all kinds of Canuck fans talking with this through social media over the last number of hours since this information was dropped on TSN Radio earlier today. And it is pretty substantial news. These guys are very well connected to the team. I mean, guys like Sekeres and Rick Dhaliwal, they always have a lot of really good, solid inside scoop on pulse on the Canucks organization, and they quite often do have a lot of interesting things to say where the team is heading in the future. So there's certainly, like I said, doesn't mean this happens, but there certainly is some weight to the possibility that it could happen. Obviously, the Canucks playoff performance is going to play a major role in what other offseason moves they decide to make. We do have the NHL Stanley Cup playoffs returning now in 3 weeks, as we confirmed earlier tonight. August 1st, hockey's officially back. So obviously, these teams that are going to be playing, these players have an opportunity to make their case for new contracts, whether or not they should stay, be traded, all that. There's a lot yet to be determined, which will make NHL decisions certainly, decide here what they're going to do once we finally hit the offseason, which is looking like it'll be early to mid-October. So certainly a very interesting trade rumor, not one that I expected to come across by any means at all. But I'd love to know what your thoughts are. I know there's a lot of Canuck fans that follow this channel. I know Brock Boeser is a very popular player in Vancouver. He has had his health issues for sure. I mean, maybe there's other concerns about him staying healthy. Do they sell high while he still has a reasonable contract right now? I don't know. I just don't know where this is coming from and really what they should do moving forward. I mean, I would be very, 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 very careful about trading a top young player like Boeser. Like I said, those deals are very hard to win, and it would just be a real shame for the Canuck fan base and the organization to lose one of its top young rising stars due to a lot of free agent mismanagement. In my opinion, that would just be a really sad thing to see for this team who's been on the rise throughout the last little while here. So let me know what your thoughts are down in the comment section. Do you think a Brock Boeser trade is realistic, especially as a sweetener to move out some of these bad contracts? And what kind of return could it possibly be? Let me know your thoughts down below, and we'll continue the conversation. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.